Good afternoon. I hope you guys are having a good week. Today I'm going to talk to you about week 3, reflect on some of your comments, and talk a little bit about some housekeeping activities. So, you know that the differentiated unit plan is coming up. I know that you're working in groups. If you don't have a group or a partner, please let me know. I'm aware that one person is working by herself. If you don't have someone to work with and you haven't told me that, please let me know today. You can actually, or this week soon, you can actually comment on this discussion thread. I am in the process of grading your behavior support plans, and I will get them back to you soon. I always feel like that's a huge learning tool that comes out of this class, so that you're prepared for with a behavior support plan and what that looks like. So I tend to grade that slowly and with lots of concentration. The final is coming up in 2 weeks, which is simply amazing. Can you imagine? This class is almost over. So I just wanted to let you know that the final is 50 multiple choice questions, and there's a study guide in your in the final folder. I think I'll make sure of that. You need to the final will be over your readings, over your posts, the discussions that we've had, and your behavior support plan, and the videos we've made. So that will be something to think about as we move forward. This week we had 6 technology presentations, which was a lot, but also very exciting. It was really cool that 4 out of 6 of your technology presentations involved instructional techniques. When you teach in an inclusive setting, trying to get the instructional level at exactly the right place for kids with disabilities is difficult at times. So it's important to know that there are technology, computer-based activities that you can use to help you do that. So some of the instructional programs were Edpuzzle that Chetna posted. It allows you to video your lesson and track student comprehension and actually engagement in the activity. Sarah presented iReady. Joseph presented ABC Mouse, and Sandra presented using an iPad in a preschool classroom. It's amazing, isn't it, what preschoolers can do with technology? I remember the first time I got a computer. I had been teaching for a while. Didn't have a clue how to turn it on. And my oldest son, Clint, was in maybe 5th grade, and he kept trying to tell me how to turn it on, and I wouldn't let him. So finally he said, if you'll just push the button, the computer will come on. So at that point he knew more than I did, and I think that's true of preschoolers sometimes at this point. So iPads are super handy. They can move with them, and you could put activities on there. For kids with autism, you can actually use communication boards built into the iPad, which is an awesome thing. What else did I want to say? Oh, Erica presented Annotate. Erica, I want to thank you for that. I'm going to try that in my class in the fall. I could see how it was really good for math, but I teach intro to special ed, and I really like for those guys to be engaged while I'm teaching, so I'm going to try to use it and see how that works. Thanks for letting me know about that. And Christine, I think we should all have Milo. I really liked Milo the robot. Recently I did a review, and one of the studies in the review was computer-based social skills instruction for kids with autism. So Milo fits right in there. Let's see. So there's 3 discussion boards in chapter 6. Sometimes I feel like we have a lot of discussion boards, and I'm sorry for that. But I think you guys learn a lot from each other, and it's important for you to talk about what you've read instead of just reading, and to have a conversation around that. I think I've told you before that I perceive discussion boards as a conversation tool. So you talked about the most important strategies for moving kids from a self-contained classroom, kids with disabilities from a self-contained classroom to an inclusive setting. You guys mentioned a lot of really important things that you had read in chapter 6. when I taught adaptive behavior in a middle school, we had a very structured leveling system and token economy system. So students worked their way up. I think it started with green. It was green, yellow, purple, and red, I think, maybe. Or maybe the opposite with green at the end. And when they reached the fourth level, then they actually earned their way out into a classroom. The problem is that looked like, cool, today you've earned your way into a social studies class. So go on and go. Let me know how that works for you. Many times they were brought back to me in the same day. So it's important that we recognize now that transitioning is super important. You guys talked about pre-teaching and generalizing skills to the next setting. So in your classroom, in a self-contained classroom, for example, you would have certain expectations and certain routines, which if you consider my classroom, we had intense expectations and immediate consequences for following those rules. And we also had routines that were just like clockwork. So when the students moved into a gen ed classroom, at times those rules were different, the expectations were different, and the routines were definitely different. So it's important to figure out what the routines and expectations are in the classroom that's going to be receiving the student and teach those skills before you send the kid out. By pre-teaching. So the other thing is to prepare the receiving teacher for the student. That looks a little different than saying, dude, when he gets mad is really bad. That looks a little bit like starting with the strengths. Johnny's really good at reading. He loves to read out loud. He loves positive reinforcement. He loves to hear from you praise and letting him know when he's doing things correctly. Start with the strengths. And then you can move on to these are some potential situations that may occur. And when you see this behavior, this is what I do to decrease the behavior. This is what his IEP says we're going to do, or his BIP. So that's not an overnight thing. So I would begin preparing the receiving teacher and the student well in advance before you think he's ready to move out. You talked about doing an ecological assessment of the receiving classroom. Again, super important. You have to know what's going on in there. If you are the special ed teacher teaching the student. If you're the general ed teacher, it's super important to share that information with the special ed teacher so they can prepare the student. Let him know what supports he's going to have in the special ed classroom, what supports he's not going to have. Ask him what supports he needs. The other thing that you guys talked about was the hidden curriculum. In all settings, there tends to be a hidden curriculum. Students with disabilities don't always pick up on that, especially if that's not the classroom they're used to being in. So it's okay to talk about it. And it's really important to tell them what that means and what might happen and what certain people mean by certain things, right? And then when the student moves into the setting, it's important that we watch what's going on, evaluate in that setting. What's going on? What needs to be different? What can we do to help him and support him stay in that situation effectively, successfully? So the second discussion board was the ABC discussion board. I was really impressed at how you supported each other in that activity. It's not always important to determine the consequence of behavior. A lot of times we can see what the antecedent is and we can name the behavior in measurable and observable terms. But sometimes it's hard to see what the actual consequence is because we tend to think of consequence as something different than it means behaviorally. So what happens to maintain that behavior? For example, let me give you an example. So I hand Johnny a worksheet, a math worksheet, and he throws it on the floor. And then I send him out of the classroom. This happens every day in math. He sits through my instruction. Everything's great. He does group activities, but when I put a worksheet on his desk, he throws it on the floor, he screams, and I send him out of the classroom. So the consequence in that situation is me sending him out of the classroom. And that's what he wants, right? Because he's trying to escape that activity for whatever reason. So by me continuing to do the same thing, I'm just increasing the probability that behavior is going to occur again. So by understanding that he's trying to escape that worksheet, I can address it differently. I can teach him to say, I can't do this worksheet. or I can give him a red-green card, and he could turn the red card up when he's not comfortable doing the worksheet by himself. I can match him with a peer. We could do some of the computer-based programs that we've talked about. It's important to figure out what's going on with Johnny and that worksheet. Can he do it? Can he not do it? Like I said earlier, it's really difficult to exactly pinpoint their independent level, right? I mean, we can do that, but sometimes students have an adverse reaction to independent academic work. A lot of times kids with disabilities have that. I noticed that throughout your examples, there was a lot of work avoidance, a lot of escape maintain behaviors. So it's important to recognize what's going on and to give the child a voice. What's happening? Why don't you want to do this? What can we do differently? And you guys said all of those things in your post. So I was really excited about your ability to follow the ABC and determine what's the antecedent, what's the behavior, and what's the consequence. You guys read the New Teacher Survival Guide about classroom management. We know that the number one reason that teachers leave teaching in the first 5 years is because of student behavior. So really being prepared with a classroom management plan at the beginning of every year is super important. And it sounds like you guys have a good handle on that, and that maybe the book actually helped you with that. So you talked about setting the standards early on. I'm sure you've all been told, don't smile till Christmas. I don't think that's okay. You should always smile, but you should also be really clear that the kids know what the expectations are. What are your expectations? And to teach behavior the same way you teach academics. So you're going to introduce the expectation. You're going to model the appropriate behavior. You're going to practice the appropriate behavior. And then you're going to reteach if needed, just like an academic skill. Don't assume that students know, even if they do. It's important to practice and reteach. You talked about the importance of student-teacher and student-student relationships. That's the heart of your behavior management plan, is building relationships with students and having rapport with students so that they respect you, you respect them, and the classroom runs smoother. That's not always easy to do, is it? So, but it's important that you learn how to do that. Routines, establish your routines. If you have one or two students that are totally having problems, think about the triggers and the function, which you told me that you were comfortable doing. Positive behavior supports and universal design for learning are awesome ways to set up a classroom and a classroom management strategy, a classroom management plan. One of you talked about using proximity. There's actually research on teacher proximity, which seems a little bit like it's from the College of Duh, right? So if I stand behind a student while I'm teaching, they're less likely to engage in misbehavior unless that misbehavior is maintained by teacher attention, right? And then it's likely to go up. Focus on positives. I think I said that. And consistency. Consistency is probably one of the hardest things to do, but it's also one of the most important things for students with disabilities to understand, and for all students to understand what your expectations are and how to consistently follow your rules. You have to be consistent, right? You guys talked about positive narration, which was really cool that you read that and understood that. What else? Engagement. So we can come up with all kinds of classroom management strategies, but we know that if students are academically engaged, they're less likely to be disruptive. They're less likely to be off task. So if you think about student interest and choice when you're teaching active lessons, then you're less likely to have to deal with a lot of inappropriate behavior. Again, that's not always easy when you're differentiating instruction for a wide range of students' abilities. But you've learned some skills here that will help you do that. Use your technology to your advantage. Use opportunities to respond, which I think is in your last week of this class. But there's a lot of opportunities so that everybody in the room is engaged in a lesson. Use whiteboards. Use response cards, right? So those things will help you with your classroom management plan. So it's more than just What are the rules? What are the expectations? How am I going to respond when you demonstrate appropriate behavior? How am I going to respond when you demonstrate inappropriate behavior? It's also about planning for student engagement and interest in your activities. So that's pretty much what I have for this week. Please leave comments for me if you'd like to on this discussion board, and have a good week.